Hello, dear listener. You're here, drifting already, maybe with one eye heavier than the other, ready for a story so calm and oddly specific that you'll forget you even pressed play. Tonight, we're wandering into a world of creaking ships, sea spray, and an unromantic truth that history quietly mutters when nobody is paying attention. 18th century pirates often preferred tea over rum. Yes, tea. The same drink currently lukewarming in the mug you forgot beside your bed. Before we set sail, a tiny warning. You probably won't make it through this day. Don't take it personally. Most people don't. That's the whole point. But while you're still awake, let me ask softly if you'd like to support these dreamy voyages. Consider subscribing or leaving a like quietly, the way you drop a pebble into a pond. And if you feel generous, tell me in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what time is it right now in your corner of the world? Sometimes it's midnight. Sometimes it's 3 in the afternoon. And sometimes it's both, depending on how many cups of coffee you've had. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You stand on the deck of a wooden brigantine somewhere in the year 1720. The sails swell above you like great sleepy curtains, and the horizon stretches wider than your patience for modern life. Salt clings to your lips. The deck tilts gently beneath your feet. And instead of wild shouts and reckless barrels of rum, you hear a more domestic sound, water bubbling in a dented iron kettle. Steam rises, carrying the faint fragrance of leaves that have traveled farther than you ever will. This is tea, and yes, it's being brewed by pirates. The historical fact here is simple, but somehow delightful. By the early 18th century, tea had seeped into the bones of British culture so thoroughly that even men who lived by plunder craved it. Ships raiding the Atlantic often found chests of Chinese tea tucked alongside silk and porcelain. When pirates took the loot, they didn't just sell it, they drank it. Tea offered warmth, clarity, and fewer headaches than the endless gallons of rum. Rum, of course, still had its place. It was the social glue, the cheers of the high seas, the way you survived a soggy evening with a crew of cutthroats who smelled like they hadn't heard of soap. But drinking rum all day turned you into something resembling wet laundry. Tea, by contrast, let you function. It gave you the steady hands to tie ropes, climb masts, and maybe even aim a cannon without falling over. And here's the weird cultural tidbit. Some pirate crews treated tea time as a ritual, a kind of floating tavern etiquette. Picture a group of hardened sailors with scars, gold earrings, and missing teeth, gently pouring each other cups, pinkies not extended, but dignity strangely intact. Some even added a bit of citrus peel to the pot, believing it kept away scurvy. Historians still debate whether pirates really believed the citrus helped or if they just enjoyed the taste. Either way, it was oddly civilized, like a storm pausing to admire the sunset. You lean against the rail, mug in hand, watching the horizon blush with the last streaks of daylight. Around you, men mutter about tomorrow's plunder, but for now, they're quiet, sipping, letting the warmth seep into their bones. One man slurps so loudly that another threatens to throw him overboard, but only half-heartedly. It's ironic, isn't it? You came here expecting rum-fueled chaos, but what you find instead is closer to a floating tea salon, minus the lays and polite conversation. Though to be fair, some pirates were quite skilled at polite conversation. They just usually ended it with cannon fire. The sky deepens, lanterns flicker, and you feel the slow rhythm of the waves pulling you, rocking you, reminding you that this is not a story to stay awake through. This is a gentle unraveling, and tea is only the beginning. Morning comes not with a jolt, but with a sluggish crawl of pale sunlight across the wooden planks. You wake to the smell of damp canvas and the faint tang of salt, realizing that yes, you're still on this pirate ship. The kettle rattles again. Someone's already making tea. Pirates may have been unpredictable, but their craving for a hot cup first thing in the morning was surprisingly consistent. Here's another fact. 18th century pirates often seized merchant ships carrying East India Company goods. Those goods included tea, tons of it. Imagine crates upon crates, all carefully packed in lead-lined chests, suddenly tumbling into pirate hands. A fortune if sold, a comfort if brewed. It's hard to imagine now, but tea was once more expensive than some jewels. In London, wealthy ladies displayed their tea sets like trophies, and households kept tea locked in little chests, guarded with the kind of paranoia you reserve for your Wi-Fi password. And yet, here, sloshing in the middle of the sea, men who couldn't spell paranoia were casually steeping handfuls of leaves as though it were no more valuable than rainwater. Obscure tidbit time. Some pirates preferred to brew their tea with seawater, not fresh water. Yes, seawater. They swore it gave more strength to the brew. More likely, it just saved them from using the precious fresh supply. You can almost taste it now. Earthy leaves mixed with the brine of the ocean. The kind of drink that makes you wonder if pirates secretly invented kombucha. Historians still debate whether this was a widespread practice or just one crew's questionable experiment. You sit with your cup and notice the daily rhythm unfolding. Someone sharpens a cutlass, the sound scraping like a lazy cricket. Someone else patches a sail with hands surprisingly neat for a man covered in tattoos. And over in the corner, a pirate with half an eyebrow missing hums a lullaby to himself. It's oddly domestic, as though the ship were less a den of rogues and more a very dysfunctional family home that just happens to move at 6 knots. The sarcasm writes itself. Here you thought pirates woke every morning, swinging from ropes and shouting "Arr!" In truth, mornings were full of chores. Decks scrubbed, ropes coiled, sails trimmed, chores, tea, and the occasional squabble about who snored loudest. Hardly Hollywood material unless you enjoy watching men argue about laundry. But don't dismiss it. These details mattered. A well-run ship meant survival. And survival meant there would be another evening to brew another pot. Tea wasn't just a drink. It was structure, routine, the fragile thread holding chaos at bay. You glance at the horizon and think of the tea itself. Most of it was Chinese, bohea, souchong, or green leaves with names mispronounced into oblivion by English tongues. Pirates didn't care for accuracy. They cared for flavor, warmth, and the small illusion of civilization. Tea gave them that. The wind picks up, sails creak, and someone laughs. A deep belly laugh that ends in a cough. The ship turns slightly, and you catch sight of another vessel far away. A tiny dot on the blue. Maybe merchant, maybe navy. For now, it doesn't matter. The tea must finish steeping. And so the morning drifts on, not with drama but with smallness. the way mornings often do. The sound of the spoon clinking against a tin mug, the slosh of waves, the sigh of a man stretching his sore back. If you close your eyes, you could almost mistake it for any other household, except this one floats, leaks, and occasionally fires cannons. By the time the pot is empty, you realize this strange paradox. Pirates lived wild lives, yes, but even they clung to ordinary rituals. They were men dangling between chaos and order, clinging to tea leaves as though they were anchors. And perhaps, in a way, they were. The ship sails onward, carrying you with it, deeper into this curious history, where nothing is quite as expected and everything tastes faintly of salt. The day stretches long, like an old rope left in the sun. You feel it in the lazy pace of the ship, the creak of boards, and the way time seems to soften at sea. Noon approaches, and with it, the heat. The air is thick enough to chew, though you probably wouldn't recommend the flavor. The pirates shuffle about like restless cats, each with their own task, each silently wishing for shade. Another kettle goes on the fire. Yes, more tea. By now you've caught the rhythm. Dawn begins with steaming mugs. Midday simmers with more leaves steeping. And the evening ends in yet another pot. You wonder if pirates drank tea because they loved it, or simply because it was something warm and predictable in a life that wasn't. Historians still debate whether the tea habit was true devotion or sheer practicality, but either way, the result is the same. Mugs in hands, steam on faces, quiet sighs that sound suspiciously like contentment. Here's the big fact for this stretch of the story. Tea was so tightly linked to daily life in Britain by the 1700s that pirates, many of whom were former sailors in the Royal Navy or merchant service, carried the habit with them into their new careers. These weren't exotic rebels reinventing themselves at sea. They were ordinary men, doing ordinary things in extraordinary circumstances. And when faced with choosing between a mug of tea and another round of rum, sometimes their bones just wanted warmth, not wobble. Now for the obscure bit. Some pirate ships kept their stolen tea in special locked chests, not to protect it from enemies, but to protect it from themselves. Tea had a way of vanishing mysteriously overnight. much like your snacks in a shared apartment. Pirates developed rules, informal ones naturally, about rationing, so the whole crew could share without one greedy soul draining the leaves like a desperate student raiding the communal fridge. You watch as a few men sit in the shade of a flapping sail, mugs in hand, talking not about treasure or battles, but about home. One mutters about a wife he hasn't seen in 3 years. Another reminisces about London streets that smelled of bread in the mornings. They sip slowly, eyes unfocused, as though tea carries them not just across the ocean, but back in time. Of course, not everyone is so sentimental. One pirate insists loudly that his tea tastes better with a splash of rum. Another says tea is only for civilized folk, which makes everyone laugh, because none of them could be mistaken for civilized if you painted them in gold leaf and velvet. The sarcasm is obvious. Pirates might have been thieves, but they weren't entirely without taste. Or at least, their taste buds weren't. As the sun presses overhead, you feel the lull of routine. Someone patches the sail again. Someone else snores in the corner, mouth wide open, probably dreaming of a tavern that no longer exists. And through it all, the tea keeps pouring, one mug at a time. It isn't glamorous. It isn't dramatic. It's just steady. The way tides are steady, the way sleep creeps in unnoticed. Remember that street one pirate mentioned, smelling of bread? You think of it now. Funny how even cutthroats missed bakeries. Maybe that's why tea mattered. It paired in their minds with the kind of simple foods they couldn't have. A loaf, a biscuit, maybe a jam tart. Instead, they had salted pork and hardtack. Yet, in their cups, steaming gently, was a memory of something softer. The ship rocks, gulls cry, and you lean into the sound of waves. Tea is ordinary, but sometimes ordinary is the only thing holding a wild world together. Afternoon fades with the slowness of honey dripping. Shadows stretch across the deck. The sun dips and a gentle breeze stirs. You find yourself leaning against the railing, watching the water ripple like silk. When the inevitable happens, another pot of tea goes on. At this point, you've lost track of how many brews the day has held. But the pirates don't seem to care. Tea, it turns out, is endlessly repeatable. Here's today's historical anchor. Tea wasn't just a British obsession, it was a global commodity shaped by empire. The East India Company built fortunes moving leaves across continents. Fortunes that sometimes ended up in the hands of men like these. Pirates who saw no reason not to help themselves to a floating warehouse of luxuries. Pirates were, in a strange way, parasites on empire, sipping from the same cup as kings and merchants. And now for the obscure curiosity. Some crews flavored their tea with nutmeg or cloves, spices looted alongside the leaves. Imagine it. Rough sailors, unwashed and sunburned, carefully grating nutmeg into a communal pot like finicky gourmands. The irony is delicious. Historians still debate whether this was true refinement or simple experimentation. But the image is hard to shake. Scarred hands delicately sprinkling spice into a brew, as though preparing a recipe for a cookbook nobody would ever publish. As the evening settles in, the mood shifts. Pirates, contrary to their reputation, weren't constantly violent. Most evenings, they lounged. They told stories. They bickered about nonsense. One argues that tea should be left to steep for 3 minutes. Another insists on 5. And the quarrel nearly turns serious until someone coughs loudly and mutters, "It's just leaves in water, lads." That ends it. You sip, watching the lanterns flicker. Tea glows in the mugs like liquid amber. Around you, conversations turn reflective again. One man admits he misses church bells. Another says he hasn't prayed in years but still whispers to the sea. A third insists the sea listens better than God anyway. Sarcasm hovers, but beneath it lies something softer. The quiet confessions of men who live on borrowed time. And here you are, part of it. The deck smells faintly of tar and smoke. Your fingers warm around a mug. Your ears full of voices fading and returning like waves. You think about how pirates needed this. Moments of calm. The stereotype is endless action. But in truth, most of their lives were waiting. Waiting for wind. Waiting for prey. Waiting for storms to pass. Tea was the bridge across that endless waiting. The sky deepens. Stars spill across the dark. And the ocean becomes a mirror. Someone hums again, low and tuneless, but soothing. It blends with the sound of the waves until you're not sure which is which. The kettle hisses once more, and the cycle repeats. Heat, steep, sip, sigh. And perhaps as you watch, you realize this is the great irony of pirate life. Behind the gunpowder and bravado, it was slow, repetitive, sometimes even dull, which makes it perfect for sleep. The breeze softens your eyelids too, and you wonder quietly, was tea ever more than a drink to them? Was it a piece of home, stolen or remembered? A fragile scrap of order in a life built on disorder? Historians still debate the answer. For now, you simply sip and let the question drift away with the tide. The night stretches on, thick and velvet, the kind of darkness that feels both infinite and strangely close. You step across the deck carefully, the boards groaning underfoot, while lantern light wobbles in the wind. Most of the crew has gone quiet. They've retreated into their hammocks, the fabric swinging with the rhythm of the sea. You hear snores, sighs, and the occasional mumble, half dreams muttered into the air. And yet, somewhere near the small galley fire, you notice it again. The kettle, still there, still whispering steam. It seems absurd, but tea was not just for mornings. Pirates brewed it at all hours. They drank when they were bored, when they were anxious, when the sea gave them too much silence. Tea was both the cure and the companion. And here's the historical fact for tonight. Pirates, like most sailors, had to ration fresh water carefully. Boiling it for tea made it feel safer, even if the science of germs hadn't been invented yet. They might not have known about bacteria, but they understood one truth. Boiled water rarely made you sick, which meant tea wasn't just comforting, it was survival wrapped in steam. And here's an obscure tidbit, whispered like gossip among historians. Some pirates experimented with adding toasted rice to their tea, imitating a Japanese style they'd probably only half understood. Imagine the scene. Sailors who had never seen Kyoto in their lives, tossing handfuls of rice into a kettle, grinning proudly, convinced they'd invented something new. Whether the taste was pleasant or simply odd, nobody can quite say. Historians still debate whether this was genuine culinary curiosity or simply desperation on days when tea leaves were scarce. You take a sip, your mug warm against the cool night air, and notice how quiet the sea is now. The earlier chatter has faded. Only the ship moves, the creak of wood, the hush of waves against the hull. The stars above feel endless, a dome scattered with diamonds. And you realize that pirates, despite their violence and bravado, must have spent countless nights like this, just staring, just sipping, just existing in the pause between chaos. Of course, not every pirate loved the pause. Some grumbled about fancy leaf water, preferring the blunt hit of rum. One sailor sneers, saying tea makes a man soft. Another replies that rum makes a man stupid. The debate goes nowhere, like most late-night arguments, until someone snores loudly enough to end it. It's funny, isn't it? You expect pirates to be roaring and reckless every hour. Instead, the reality looks more like this. Men wrapped in hammocks, mugs steaming nearby, arguing sleepily about beverages. The great terrors of the sea reduced to tired uncles at a family gathering. And as you listen, you realize something else. The ritual of tea was not just about the drink, but about the rhythm it created. It gave shape to hours that would otherwise blur into one long ocean. It was, in its own way, a lullaby. The stars shift slowly. The horizon melts into ink, and your body feels the same sway as the ship. Even you, a stowaway in this story, find yourself softening, eyes heavier, mug cooling in your hands. Dawn again. You're starting to notice that sea time is circular, not linear. One day folds into the next, like the repeated steeping of the same set of leaves. Morning breaks pale and pink, gulls wheel in the distance, and once again, predictably, almost comically, the kettle rattles. Tea is made. Here's your daily historical anchor. Pirates in the 1700s sometimes carried their tea not in delicate boxes, but in rough sacks, stuffed alongside tobacco or gunpowder. The leaves picked up strange flavors this way: smoky, bitter, sometimes even peppery. To modern tastes, it would be a disaster. To them, it was simply what tea tasted like. And perhaps it was even better, more alive, more of the sea itself. Obscure tidbit: some ships kept broken bits of porcelain teapots looted from merchant cargoes. They used the shards as scoops for leaves, or sometimes even as charms. Sailors were notoriously superstitious, and one tale suggests a pirate kept a porcelain handle tied to his belt for luck. Whether it worked, of course, historians still debate. You sip your morning mug and look around. Chores resume. Decks scrubbed, ropes tightened, sails checked. But there's an air of expectation today. The lookout squints at the horizon, and eventually a murmur spreads. A merchant ship is spotted. The day might bring action, but even now, even in the stir of anticipation, mugs are passed around. Tea first, plunder later. Priorities matter. The irony is sharp. Men preparing for possible violence pause to debate whether the leaves should be steeped longer. One swears the brew is too weak. Another retorts that weak tea is the only kind worth drinking. Voices rise, not in battle cries, but in culinary snobbery. If you've ever heard office co-workers bicker about coffee strength, you already understand pirate diplomacy. And yet, beneath the sarcasm and grumbling, you sense nerves. Tea soothes them. It gives them something familiar to hold as they face the uncertainty of the day. A warm mug steadies the hand as surely as courage does. Remember the taste of seawater tea mentioned before? It makes a comeback now. With fresh water running low, the cook has diluted the brew with briny liquid again. The flavor is predictably unpleasant. Someone spits dramatically over the side, declaring it a crime worse than mutiny. Another swears it's good for the blood, though nobody looks convinced. The ship draws closer to its target. The sails puff with wind. The crew grows restless. But still, they sip. They hold their mugs like talismans, grounding themselves in the ordinary before the extraordinary arrives. And you realize as you hold your own cup that tea wasn't just an indulgence. It was armor, not of iron or wood, but of routine. A shield of leaves and water against the chaos of the sea. The horizon brightens. The kettle empties, and the day sharpens into focus. Something is about to happen. But first, one more sip. The sea shifts underfoot. and the sails groan as the ship leans into the wind. Ahead, the faint outline of the merchant vessel grows clearer, no longer a dot, but a shape with sails full and heavy. You expect shouting, cannon fire, chaos. Instead, the first thing you hear is the cook, hollering that the kettle is empty again. The absurdity would be funny if it weren't so true. Priorities remain unchanged. Pirates may chase fortune, but they don't do it thirsty. Here's your historical anchor for this part. Records from captured pirate ships often listed tea alongside weapons, powder, and food. Tea was not an afterthought. It was part of the inventory, considered as essential as bread or water. That tells you something about its place in daily life. Not luxury, but necessity. Now for the obscure tidbit. A few crews are said to have poured leftover tea into barrels to mix with beer, creating a drink they swore kept the stomach steady. The taste must have been questionable at best, but seafaring diets were never about fine dining. Imagine it. A frothy mug of weak beer tinged with bitter tea. Refreshing? Maybe. Appetizing? Doubtful. Historians still debate whether this was actually consumed in earnest or simply joked about, like the sailors' equivalent of threatening to make a casserole out of hardtack. The crew readies themselves. Muskets checked, cutlasses sharpened, but the mood is still oddly casual. A few men hum tunes. One adjusts his hat repeatedly, as though that might make him braver. Another slurps from a mug until someone smacks it out of his hand, muttering about manners. It's hard to feel terror when the prelude to battle looks like a drowsy breakfast club. And you stand by the rail, noticing how calm the sea is. The merchant ship looms nearer. Its crew surely sees the black flag now, though flags are less dramatic in reality than in legend. Sometimes pirates didn't even bother raising them. The mere silhouette of their ship was threat enough. But the funny thing is this: most pirate encounters never involved battle. Merchants surrendered quickly. Better to give up cargo than risk your life. And so, instead of bloodshed, you often had long, awkward negotiations shouted across water, occasionally interrupted by someone sneezing or by a kettle clattering. Sure enough, this ship lowers its sails in token surrender. Relief spreads across the pirate deck. no fight today, just loot. But even as preparations are made to board, someone insists on refilling the kettle. Because why not? Conquest tastes better with tea. You catch the irony. Pirates painted by history as lawless and wild were in truth often methodical, practical, even ritualistic. They lived in the liminal space between fear and routine, and tea anchored them more surely than rum ever could. The boarding party prepares to go across, mugs drained, sleeves rolled, as though heading into a workday shift. You can't help but think, perhaps they were. Evening descends again, gentle and inevitable. The merchant ship has been relieved of its cargo, tea, among other treasures, and the spoils are stacked on deck, gleaming in the low light. But there's no roaring victory, no endless drunken revel. Instead, the crew sits in a half circle, fire crackling, mugs raised, savoring the very thing they've stolen. Fresh tea, fragrant, leaves still clinging with the scent of faraway soil. Here's your final historical note. The myth of pirates as relentless drunkards is only half true. Rum was plentiful, yes, but tea was a quieter, steadier companion. In fact, tea drinking was one of the few things that blurred the line between pirate and gentleman, thief and officer, rich and poor. The same leaves sipped in London parlours found their way into chipped mugs at sea. And the odd cultural tidbit for this close. There are whispered records of pirate captains hosting tea councils. Serious crew discussions held with mugs in hand. Decisions about navigation or plunder made over steaming leaves. The contrast is comical. Democracy by teapot. Historians still debate whether these accounts are exaggerated, but they fit, don't they? Tea lent gravity even to rogues. The day ends not with violence, but with warmth. The stars glow faintly overhead. The sea sighs like a tired companion. You sit with your mug, steam curling upward, watching men lean back, shoulders softened, their laughter more gentle now. For a fleeting moment, it feels less like piracy and more like family. And now, dear listener, it's time to let this story fade, as every day must. The ship drifts on, sails slack in the quiet breeze, the ocean humming like a lullaby beneath it. You lean against the railing, eyes half closed, watching the horizon dissolve into silver. Every sound grows slower, softer. The murmur of waves, the scrape of ropes, the faint clink of mugs set aside. Even the pirates have grown drowsy, their laughter trailing into silence, their bodies folding into hammocks that sway gently like cradles. You breathe in, slow and steady, as if you too are part of the rhythm of this floating world. The air smells of salt and smoke, but faintly sweet, with the ghost of tea leaves still steeping somewhere below deck. Steam drifts like a final sigh, dissolving into the night. Imagine yourself lying back now, as though the planks beneath you have become a bed. The ocean itself a great soft mattress. Each roll of the waves is a breath. Each whisper of wind a blanket drawing over you. You are safe here, carried by the same ritual that soothed even the roughest sailors. The simple comfort of warm water, leaves, and quiet company. Let the story dissolve like sugar in a cup. Let the voices fade like lanterns dimming one by one. You need do nothing more. No battles, no storms, no noise. Just this, the hush of the sea, the comfort of a mug now empty, and the weight of sleep pulling you gently downward. The pirates are gone to dreams. The ship rocks steady. The night is wide and kind, and you too drift slowly, effortlessly into rest. Good night.